Hey there guys, it's Zan, and I'm going to be using this video to respond to some allegations made in a twitlonger posted recently by my ex-girlfriend Lani, in which she accuses me of dumping her for no reason, kicking her out of my apartment, stealing her cat, taking all of her belongings, and essentially leaving her destitute and homeless, like some kind of insane asshole. Lani has given a very twisted version of events to the public, filled with lies and deceit, but I'm willing to use my platform and the evidence that I have to debunk these lies and set the record straight. To tell you all the full story, it's going to take a lot of explaining, so I really appreciate all of your patience and please bear with me. Most of you who watch my channel probably already know about my ex-girlfriend Lani, who I started dating back in December 2019, and was with for nearly 2 years before I broke up with her over a month ago. When I first met Lani, I'll admit I was a very naive 20-year-old with very little life experience, and she was 27. Well, I thought she was at the time, but now I've learned from her recent arrest report that she's actually a year older than she said she was, and she was really 28 when we started dating, and I was 20. I really can't tell you what her motivation was for lying about her age the whole relationship, because with me at least, a girl telling me that she's a year younger than she really is just kind of selling yourself short for no reason. The first 6 months of our relationship were completely long distance, and she lived all the way on the other side of the country in Palm Springs, California, and I lived all the way in Florida, living with my parents. I've talked about this many times on my channel before, and this isn't exactly news, but my living situation with my parents eventually just got too toxic for me to continue being happy and making content, and I decided that my best course of action was to move away. And so I did. I moved all the way across the country to Palm Springs, California with Lani. At first, living with my girlfriend was like a dream. Finally, I'd get to live away and have independence from my parents for really the first time in my life, but I'd also be living with somebody who I loved. Once we moved in together, Lani and I more or less had the agreed tradcon relationship. I was definitely the breadwinner of the home, and her duties were mostly around house chores and whatnot, as long as they weren't too gross or too heavy for her to do. For example, I had to kill all the bugs. She would call cockroaches babadooks, and they were my job to kill. As the relationship prolonged and the honeymoon phase began to pass, I began to notice that my finances looked to be on a downturn. I was already monitoring my income pretty closely, but it started to seem like, despite the fact I was streaming and uploading more, I just wasn't seeing the expected return by the end of the month or even by the end of the week. It's a pretty complicated way of saying that I was pretty sure I was making more money, but for some reason my balance was staying about the same. Now, my first instinct was to check the incoming and outgoing payments in the PayPal main homepage to see if there was anything unseen or unexpected going on there, and nothing was there. But when I did all the math and I crunched all the numbers up, the math didn't add up. There shouldn't have been that little money in my balance. Now, quick side note, I've been criticized for not having a bank account, and this is a lie. The claim I don't have a bank account comes from a poorly worded tweet of mine in which I say I don't use a bank, I use PayPal, in response to someone who commented on one of my Twitter posts recommending I call my bank to try and fix an issue I was having with PayPal. I obviously have a real bank account, but it's with a credit union back in Florida that's pretty slow on the money transfers from PayPal to your bank account and vice versa. Pretty cringe. It takes about 3 to 5 business days for each individual money transfer to go through and actually be usable on either end. So it became more convenient to use my PayPal as basically my checking account, with a PayPal debit card for shopping, and every month I could just transfer my check from YouTube and Twitch direct deposit from my bank account to my PayPal, instead of after every single stream having to transfer all of my money from donations from my PayPal into my bank account and wait 3 to 5 days until I can actually use them. Of course, I will be opening up an account with a new bank that doesn't have absurd wait times on transfers from PayPal to the bank account, because that was really the only thing keeping me from using a bank instead of PayPal. And I've gotten some pretty good recommendations on what banks I should go to from people on Twitter. Thank you to those people. However, to the YouTubers and streamers who spread this weird lie that's clearly meant to make me look like a fool, You know YouTube pays everyone, including you and me, through direct deposit into a bank account using your routing number. How else did you think I was getting paid by YouTube? A fucking check in the mail with Susan Wojcicki's face on it? Back on track now. I was noticing my finances were going down in an unexplainable way, and eventually I had to confront Lani on it. Anytime I'd question her about the suspicious activity happening on my PayPal account, she'd always chalk it up to some bill getting auto-paid that I didn't know about, or one of the games that I was subscribed to, like World of Warcraft, billing me, or some glitch in PayPal's system that's making it so that the live display of transactions isn't accurate to what's actually gone through. After long enough, Lani had just convinced me that this was normal. She claimed I was just getting a reality check on how expensive the cost of living is in California. She claimed that meant you just never have any money no matter what. Finances quickly became my biggest stress. I would be struggling, constantly focusing on streaming and trying to make ends meet, and mostly focusing on content that I knew would get me the most views, because if I didn't get enough views that month, I might not be able to make rent. This forced me into this perpetual cycle of needing to make content in order to pay bills, make content in order to make money, not make content because I was enjoying it. And it started to really destroy my mental health, because this job that, yes, it's a job, but I once also considered it a passion, was starting to become miserable. Lani would often respond to this stress by telling me that complaining about it and me trying to vent about it isn't going to do anything to help, and that if I wanted to try to fix the money problem, I should just wake up earlier, stream longer, stream more, add more topics to my streams, stream the things she's suggesting that she thinks will get me more views. She was always never able to offer a shoulder to lean on emotionally. It was always just a torrent of suggestions of what I could do to make more money. I was never given an outlet to feel stressed and to feel comforted from that stress. My point is that there was never any moral or emotional support from her. Now, I look back at it and I realize just how toxic and destructive this behavior from Lani was, but this is the tame part of the story. We haven't even gotten into the crazy stuff yet. Over time, my daily life started to get more and more unhappy due to my deteriorating mental health. Every little thing became frustrating, which was kind of counterintuitive to the whole reason I moved in with Lani in the first place. I would repeatedly bring up the things Lani would do that would upset me to her, and I would try to have discussions about it. But usually she'd only respond to this by bringing up how much she does for me. The thing is, she did do a lot of things for me, and this just made me feel inadequate as a partner. And funnily enough, in some cases, even as a streamer. Lani would sometimes get pretty upset if I was doing things in my free time that didn't involve work or spending time with her. If you're one of my hardcore fans, you've probably witnessed yourself, but I've had to end many Discord, VC watch parties, voice chats with friends, and sometimes even work-related calls, because Lani would want attention, despite the fact that both of us were at home all day and we spent tons of time together just by virtue of that. As time went on, my suspicion kept growing that Lani might be behind my financial issues and that she may be finding a way to steal money from my account on a daily basis without leaving a trace. It just made no sense that this amount of money could be disappearing this quickly. Even with Lani's excessive spending, which I was aware of. I was always pretty lenient when Lani would spend my money on things that were for her, because I always felt she deserved it as not necessarily a reward or payment, but honestly is just, it felt nice for her to be able to get herself nice things, because she did a lot of things for me, and I was oftentimes too busy to physically do crazy fun stuff for her all the time. While my suspicions became ever increasing, Lani was offered a job cleaning Airbnbs by a friend of hers. She took it, claiming she wanted to be able to get out of the house and make some friends and help make ends meet financially. Lani was now spending most of her time out of the house. In some cases, she would go more than a day without responding to me, and eventually started not coming home. When I'd questioned her about it and she'd actually respond, her reasoning was that she was spending the night on her friend Sarah's couch because they worked together and they were carpooling to save money on gas. I didn't buy it, and the first night that she didn't come home, I started to consider the relationship over. During this time, she wouldn't even respond to my texts, really. Like, I'd go hours and hours and hours texting her with no reply, And in some cases, she would get upset at me for how much I would text her and, like, where are you? What the fuck's going on? That she would turn off her phone so that she could, quote unquote, focus on having fun with her friends. My suspicions were now at an all-time high because of Lani's behavior and the spending she was engaging in while she was out. And frankly, regardless of whether or not I was going to end up staying with her, I needed to lock down my finances from her. Of course, as I mentioned before, if I ever brought these issues up with Lani, she would always talk them down, and of course now she adapted the argument that me having an issue with this was being controlling and I wasn't allowing her to have a social life or friends if I took issue with her being gone for literal days. A couple of other important details, by the way. Whenever Lani would leave the apartment and I would be home, she would almost always have my debit card as well as the keys to get in and out of the gate to the apartment complex on her, so that if she needed to do any shopping, she'd be able to buy things, and if she needed to get in and out of the apartment complex, she could do so. Which meant, when she's gone for long periods, this basically made it impossible for me to leave the house and go get groceries. Also, just gonna throw this little part in, Lani is completely free to prove this wrong, but her claim about getting a job cleaning Airbnbs, I don't believe it. I never once saw a dime of the money from this job, and I never once saw this friend that apparently gave her the job or helped her get it, so I will leave it up to your interpretation and whether or not she was telling the truth. And let's just say any money it may have looked like she spent out of her own pocket, well, let's just say I suspect that might have been me paying for those things. It was at this point that I began investigating my finances pretty hardcore. And of course, seeing as the relationship was practically over the way things were going, I saw it suitable to lock down all of my accounts, all of my finances, basically everything away from her. Before this, occasionally money would get stolen or go missing, and Lani would attribute it to debit card skimmers in gas pumps or her losing the card, which I would promptly deal with by canceling said card and ordering a new one from PayPal, which takes 10 business days to arrive. Some of these instances, some of you might know about, they've been public, but I started to get a growing suspicion that Lani might have had something to do with those things as well. Just a lot of things kept popping up that raised my suspicions and honestly started to stoke resentment in me towards Lani. She would constantly use my card to order Grubhub and Uber Eats to places she was cleaning for lunch instead of packing some of the fresh food that she had bought that was in our fridge and going bad. She would also constantly leave half-eaten food just sitting on the counter to go bad. She wouldn't even bother just throwing it in the fridge to let it be good for later. So I started scouring the internet to find every possible way that Lani could be stealing from my PayPal account, and I found out every way that she could access my balance. I started by disconnecting her debit card as a card that could withdraw funds from my PayPal account, canceled my own debit card so she couldn't withdraw funds with it or spend with it either, since she still had it, unauthorized PayPal and every website and app she had it as an authorized payment on, disconnected her Cash App from my PayPal, and finally changed my password to log out all users. I went by a pretty similar process to secure all my other financial accounts as well as my other non-financial accounts. But I still wanted to know how she was stealing from me, and I didn't have any concrete proof yet. I was done dismissing all this money going missing as being normal. I knew something was up. I knew now that Lani was clearly lying about these bills and glitches and all these excuses for where my money was going. And then it happened. Through my research, I learned about a feature that I'd previously not known about. On the business version of PayPal, which is what I use, there's a feature that allows you to archive payments, which was probably designed to make it so that businesses could hide away transactions that aren't relevant anymore so it doesn't clutter up their timeline. Of course, the summary of the PayPal homepage includes a timeline of recent transactions, but what I discovered is if you click on an individual transaction, you can click a drop-down feature that lets you archive it and completely delete it from that main feed. This, it turns out, was exactly what Lani was doing. After checking the archived payments feed, which you access like this, by the way, this is what I found. This is only how far back PayPal could display. Whew! I discovered hundreds of transactions dating back to November of 2021. Obviously, like I said, that's the furthest back I could go in the feed to gather screenshots and evidence from. It was after discovering this that I was able to figure out exactly what was going on, and my mind was made up. The relationship was over. Now, she wasn't home at the time, of course, so before I contacted her, I decided to reach out to somebody who I thought could give me a little bit more closure on this epiphany I'd had. Lani had a friend that before she and I moved in together in California was potentially going to be our roommate. However, she and Lani had a falling out before I came to California, and that just kind of fell through. For the sake of her privacy, we'll call her Emily. I'll be honest, when I first contacted Emily, I was pretty sure I was going to be ignored or told to fuck off. But I was surprised that she was actually pretty friendly and kind of nice about it. And she did not seem surprised to hear the news that Lani had been stealing from me for at least the past 7 months. It was in this conversation that Emily informed me that Lani had a gambling addiction and smoked methamphetamine, and that these were things that she had an addiction to well before me and her started dating. We exchanged a few texts, but after a while we had a phone call that lasted 10 hours, in which we basically shared stories about times that Lani fucked us over, stole from us, and generally related with each other with all the horrible things that Lani had done to us. Emily did confide in me, telling me that she'd hoped that Lani would one day just come clean and admit to all the things that she'd done to her, but not to ever expect it. Apparently, she really does believe the lies that she's told everybody, and she'll take them to the grave. Emily also informed me that Lani had apparently gotten her ex-boyfriend evicted from his place by not following through on making sure rent got paid, and not only that, but hiding the eviction notices their landlord was leaving on the front door. Now, the story Lani had told me was very different. She told me that she and her ex were evicted after he'd been hitting her and loudly screaming, and they got multiple noise complaints, which resulted in an eviction, and thus their full breakup. But Emily claimed this story about assault and screaming and police reports over noise, and that being the reason for the eviction, was complete bullshit. She claimed that he would hit her when he was drunk, but that had nothing to do with them getting evicted. After this conversation with Emily, I contacted Lani and I told her that our relationship was over, I was breaking up with her, and she needed to immediately start finding a new place to live. I also started making plans to move out of that apartment myself because, let's be real, I had absolutely no interest in staying there. And coincidentally enough, around that same time, my apartment complex manager knocked on my front door to let me know that I was 8 months behind on rent payments. Now, I of course knew we were a bit behind on rent due to our financial struggles. Lani convinced me these issues were my fault and I need to solve them by just streaming and uploading more and working harder, but at the same time I didn't want to make these issues public because I'm not really a big fan of charity, and I just kind of felt like if I let you guys know that I was so into financial straits that you guys would feel some strong moral pull to donate to me, even if you can't afford to, and that would really make me feel like shit. And so I just wanted to keep that to myself, and I hoped that if I worked hard enough, I would be able to, without the sympathy of people on the internet, dig ourselves out of this hole that I now knew she had dug us into. Now, Lani was never really good at giving emotional support, as I mentioned before, but she would still sorta reassure me that it was fine that we were behind on rent, because apparently she was going to get us on this California Renters Relief Program, which was supposed to pay the back rent that I owed, as well as potentially even some future months of rent payments as well, for completely free, which Lani told me would come in clutch and prevent us from getting evicted. The apartment complex manager told me that the time window of when we could get onto this program was very rapidly closing, and the fact that Lani had claimed that her laptop had been stolen and she had no computer. By the way, I bought her a new computer. It's now my new streaming computer. It wasn't sent to me by a fan, like I said. I was gonna give it to her as a replacement for her stolen laptop, but she never decided to use it, and she apparently needed it to do that application for the California Renters Program, so I don't believe a word about that story either. So thank you to my goated ass apartment complex manager who came in clutch to let me know that Lani was fucking me over in a whole other direction as well. The apartment complex manager was very nice and came in while I told her the story of everything that happened. She especially seemed invested on helping me out when she realized the fairly significant age difference between Lani and myself. I informed the manager what I do for a living and that I'm just a single guy and I'm not really into spending lots of money and that I make a decent income now and will absolutely pay off the rent money that I owe, even if I don't intend to stay here at this apartment complex any longer. And thankfully, we came to an agreement on a deal. Funnily enough, the apartment complex manager also let me know that she had been leaving notices on the door for the last couple months informing us that we were behind on rent and the consequences of not paying it, but I never saw any of these until after Lani got her job, so I'm guessing she was hiding those too. The deal with the apartment complex manager was sweet and simple. As things stood, an eviction was set to go through in 1 month, unless by the day of that deadline, the apartment had nothing in it denoting that anyone was actively living there. For example, a bed, food, TVs and entertainment stuff, just things that would obviously be like, oh, someone's living here. If the apartment had no one living in it and nothing there denoting that someone was actively living in it by that date, and I turned in my keys, I would just be given a bill for what I owe, and no eviction would be on my credit. Which, for all of you Zoomers out there that haven't gotten into home rental yet, having an eviction on your credit is not fun. It basically means for like the next 10 years, you're going to have a real hard time finding a place that will rent to you, regardless of how much money you make. Put simply, Lani and I both had 1 month to move the fuck out. As many of you guys should know, I'm planning to move to Seattle by the end of the year, maybe even early next year, so having an eviction on my credit would make that nigh impossible. At this point, I informed Lani of what needed to happen, not that she didn't already know anyway. She wasn't at the apartment at the time since we'd already broken up days earlier, and I'd requested that she not spend too much time there since I didn't want to see her face. I already decided it would be best to pack up my stuff and move out right away, since honestly, it was only 10% of the stuff that was in the apartment was my personal possessions that I actually wanted to hold on to. I'm a simple guy. Most of the furniture in the apartment was stuff I paid for, but it was stuff that Lani insisted I buy. I don't have, nor do I want, a lot of stuff. The George Carlin stuff joke really resonates with me. My plan was just to move my shit into my mom's condo, terminate my tenancy with the apartment complex in time for me not to get an eviction, and save up for the next few months without having as many bills to pay. Of course, I still gotta pay my mom rent. I'm no freeloader. While I basically save up to move to Seattle. Now, I wasn't packing at a very fast rate, of course. You know, Lani wasn't home or anything like that, and there wasn't a huge rush, but if you know anything about summer out in the desert of Palm Springs, you know that when your AC breaks, which is pretty common, it fucking sucks. And that's exactly what happened one night while I was procrastinating on packing. The AC broke down, completely non-functional. And I don't do very well in 110-degree heat, and you know what else doesn't do very well in 110-degree heat? Computer hardware and cats. Now, normally it takes a couple days for the maintenance guy to get out and repair the AC. One day if you're lucky, so I knew I had to get out of there a lot quickly than I originally intended. So I finished my packing, got the cat, and expedited my move to my mom's place. A lot of people are wondering why I even took the cat Luna with me. Remember, at the time, Lani wasn't even living in the apartment. Leaving the cat there with no AC on a 110 to 115 degree day and just like, I don't know, filling her cat food bowl with some food and one with water and just leaving her there didn't exactly seem responsible. She's a 13-year-old cat at this point, and I'm sorry, but that's just downright animal abuse if I'd done that. So I loaded up the majority of my stuff, my computer, set up basically all of it, my TV, my clothes, basically left behind nothing but a few knickknacks in the back of my closet. After getting settled in my mom's condo, which you guys of course already know about, I messaged Lani and I informed her I was no longer living there anymore and it was time for her to start packing her things up and finding a place to live. But she would argue with me and claim she had nowhere to go and nowhere to put her stuff. I told her that did not matter to me. The apartment complex told me, and she already knew from the notices on the door, that in 1 month they would be evicting, and everything in that apartment was going to end up in the county dump. I also informed her that if she didn't voluntarily move out of that apartment, and she's still living there on the day that they come to inspect, then I'd get an eviction on my credit and wouldn't be able to rent again. She needed to move her stuff out. I don't wish homelessness on anyone, but it just had to happen. There were notices being put on the door for months, and she was hiding them. She knew this was coming. She had plenty of time to prepare. As you know from her twit longer, she must have decided not to start packing her stuff, not to find a new place to live, and put it off. During this time, I focused heavily on saving money. As you know, I kept streaming and putting out content for you lovely folks over at my mom's condo. I kept in tenuous contact with Lani so that I could keep up to date on her moving arrangements. But of course, it didn't seem like she planned to actually move out and go anywhere. About 2 weeks after we broke up, I went back to the apartment to pick up some of the last things I still had there and, just make sure I was fully moved out and, check on her progress moving as well. I'd hoped that she actually was packing. I even brought over some empty cardboard boxes to help her pack if she needed them. But of course, when I got there, I instead found that she'd put some potted plants outside to make it look like she'd moved even more in, instead of moving out. So this was making me a little bit worried because it was becoming obvious that Lani might be trying to get an eviction on my credit as revenge for me breaking up with her or something. Or at the very least, maybe she just didn't care if it happened or not and was just serving herself. So I gathered up the last of my things, packed them up in my mom's truck, and told her everything in the apartment is up to you now. Take what you need and leave, because when the deadline date comes, everything left in this apartment is getting trashed by the complex. My mom even reached out and offered to help her find a new place, and she repeatedly rejected these offers, coming up with all sorts of excuses for why these suggestions given to help her somehow weren't good enough. And the only alternative is somehow for her to stay in the apartment and for me to get an eviction. Talk about entitlement. Later, I was contacted by 2 people on Instagram. The lead singer of the band that Lani will occasionally backup dance for, as well as the other backup dancer. They didn't know I'd broken up with Lani, and they were asking me if I knew where she was. Apparently, they had a gig up in Idlewild that night, and she just didn't show up, and she also wasn't answering their calls or texts. Now, to be clear, no call, no shows are basically unheard of with Lani when it comes to this band. I explained that I'd broken up with Lani after I found out she was stealing shit tons of money from me and most likely spending it on a meth and or gambling addiction. They told me this really didn't surprise them because lately Lani had been hanging out with some quote-unquote creepy guy named Cole who would just sit in a car smoking out of a pipe. She claimed it was DMT, but well, let me just say meth and DMT look very similar when someone's smoking them. This basically solidified in my mind that not only was Lani addicted to methamphetamine, but she was hanging out with some pretty bad people now too. Little more time passes, and now we're about a week out from the deadline of when the apartment needs to be fucking empty. So we stopped by the apartment to check in, hoping for the love of God that Lani was actually packing her things and preparing to move out, even if it was last second. So I unlocked the door with my key, opened it, and pushed the door inwards, but it was blocked. My assumption was that she'd barricaded the door, but it very quickly became obvious that she'd installed some kind of swinging lock mechanism. This was clearly installed specifically to make it so I, the only other person with a key to the apartment and the only person on the lease, would not have access. This is illegal. Since my mom and I weren't able to enter the apartment and she wasn't answering the door and it just didn't seem like she was there, and we didn't know who she could have in there, we were kind of freaked out, honestly. We decided to just leave and come back later, possibly with the police. And it wasn't until the next day when we checked my mail, which was now being redirected to my mom's condo, that I discovered a credit card bill. It was a bill for $75 on a credit card that I had certainly never in my life applied for, and most definitely never given Lani permission to apply for. And there was certainly only one person who could have stolen my identity as well. It was definitely Lani. I mean, come on. Who else could it have been? And it certainly fits her MO. Quickly, I canceled that card and checked to see if she'd applied for any others in my name. Turns out she'd applied for 2 other cards, but got rejected by both of them. Apparently, each time she did hard inquiries on my credit score, which lowered it quite a bit, and that's why I got rejected for those cards. Thank God, too, because I was able to quickly lock down my credit with the 3 major bureaus, and I called them and shut down those accounts and secured my shit very fast. Though it was all a real big nightmare. The next day, I spent basically basically all day typing out an entire recount of all of these events in much deeper detail than I've even told you guys for the police. Later that same night would be, to this day, my very last contact with Lani. The messages she was sending me started out kind of mean, like insulting my masculinity and calling me a pussy for breaking up with her over text. I mean, she wasn't home, so what else was I supposed to do? She realized that tactic wasn't working and started to incorporate the sort of, "Oh, please call me. I really want to listen to your voice. I'm so sorry. Please talk to me." She started to try to guilt trip me, but I recognized this as a clear attempt at manipulation and refused to talk to her and refused to call her and eventually just ignored her and went to sleep. The following morning, I got a phone call. Well, it was actually 3 missed calls from the Riverside, California jail system. It didn't take me much thinking to figure out who was calling me from jail. And after a quick search through the Riverside County Jail database, I found the arrest report and discovered when, where, and for what Lani was arrested for, and who she was arrested with. Every other suspicion that I didn't have concrete evidence for was pretty much proven when I read that police report. At least for me, a literal police report is about as close to hard evidence for all the lies and gaslighting she's done to me as I'm going to get, because believe it or not, even with everything I've seen, her lies and manipulation can be so convincing that I still find myself wondering whether or not I'm overreacting about certain aspects of this. She's genuinely that good at this. Lani'd been booked on a felony charge of possession of fictitious checks, as well as 2 misdemeanor charges for methamphetamine and paraphernalia possession. And the guy she was arrested with, none other than the creepy Cole guy, was also charged with possession of meth. He was also charged with altering or forging a false ID and a fictitious checks charge of his own. The dude also had an out-of-county warrant for narcotics sale, so he doesn't get bail. And based on the booking time and the location of their arrest, I was able to put together the basic story of what happened. Lani was arrested in Temecula, as you can see from her public police report, and that's literally over 2 hours and on the other side of a mountain from the town that we live in. She was arrested on just some random road, nowhere with houses or anything like that, so I certainly wasn't doxing her address. Chances are she was pulled over and got caught smoking a bowl of Heisenberg's finest by a cop. Of course, she continued to blow up my phone with calls from the jail. I knew she was probably scared, fiending for meth, and certainly about to beg me for lots of bail money, so I knew to ignore every single one of those calls. As much as I hate to admit it, the police did do me a pretty big favor that day, because I didn't end up having to file a police report against her that day. I figured that I didn't need to add more time to what she was already looking at, but at least now I knew the apartment was vacated, which is exactly what the apartment complex wanted. This did mean, though, that after the deadline, everything left in that apartment was going to end up in the county dump. With only a few days left until the deadline and Lani in jail, I went to the apartment. It was, of course, still locked with that locking mechanism Lani put on there, but thankfully, the back sliding glass door was unlocked. I assume the back sliding glass door was how she was getting in and out while keeping that locking mechanism flipped so it would keep me out as well. Upon entering the apartment, I was appalled by what I can only describe as an assault on my senses. Lani had turned the apartment into a frat house after a party. She fucking trashed that place, clearly knowing she didn't have long that she had to live there anymore. And what I found in that kitchen nearly made me fucking vomit. The fridge was filled with fucking rotting food that she'd bought weeks ago. The trash can had clearly not been taken out in over a week and was buzzing with these tiny little flies, just an army of them. The cat food bowl hadn't been taken care of in a month. The cat was with me, and the cat food bowl was still sitting there full in that apartment, and Lani didn't do anything with it. So it crusted over and grew a colony of maggots. And there were dishes stacked up to the tap in the sink. And don't even get me started on the counters, which were literally covered in bags and boxes from fast food places and restaurants with little nibbled, half-eaten meals that she didn't even bother to put into the fridge for later. Listen, at least I know that money she was wasting wasn't mine. If you think I'm done, there's more. All of that was one thing, but what really upset me was what it seemed Lani was preparing in the apartment. On her desk, she had some basic arts and crafts equipment, like a board for cutting specific lengths of paper, as well as a laminator. She'd also left behind what was clearly her to-do list on a piece of paper of things she planned to do in the apartment. I should actually say they, because it was quite obvious this Cole guy was staying in the apartment too now. On the to-do list, I shit you not, literally included an item that said, buy something, I think it was called a cricket, in order to make fake IDs. I'm not kidding, by the way. They added the "for making fake IDs" at the end. Yeah, I held on to that in case it becomes relevant, in case I have to press charges for ID theft. Unfortunately, that piece of paper on its own isn't really illegal, but it might become relevant if I need to press charges. And what did I find in the living room other than a big package of shrink-wrapped assorted jars, along with what seemed to be a beaker and some other glassware they just bought sitting on top of it. Now, I've seen Breaking Bad, and I've seen Walt and Jesse's Meth Lab, and it certainly wasn't that. Like I said on Chud's stream, I don't know what drug, if any, she was planning on making, but I'm just glad she hadn't started yet, because if she had, I would have had to call the police for them to go clear the building, because that apartment hadn't been inhabited for days, and good lord, I grew up in Florida, and I know better than most of you guys what happens when a neighbor leaves a meth lab unattended. It happened to my best friend's neighbor in middle school. Anyway, I'm not accusing her of making drugs in my apartment. She'd clearly not gotten to that yet, but she was clearly planning activity. In hindsight, Lani had all the time in the world to actually start doing these activities. So the fact that she hadn't actually gotten to doing these things makes me think she's either super lazy or possibly was trying to make it look like I was planning these things, so when the apartment complex would come to inspect, I would get into some kind of trouble, or at least she thought I would get into some kind of trouble. This is just a theory, though. Nothing there would have incriminated me anyway, so I moved the bed and what other furniture I wanted out. Remember, I paid for pretty much everything in this apartment, even if I didn't consider it a personal possession of mine, and started cleaning up all the trash and horrible, disgusting mess she'd left behind, because even though the apartment was going to be sending in cleaners I'd be paying for by the hour, I was honestly too embarrassed for the cleaners to see the state of the apartment, so I cleaned up all the garbage. I gathered up some of Lani's photo albums, her mom's urn, some pottery that her dad had made for her before he died. Nothing that was actually of any financial value, because frankly I don't want to get in trouble for theft for trying to do a nice thing, and packed those into a box to put into storage for her since she's in jail, and left everything else in the apartment to get trashed with the rest of everything else in the unit. What happened to everything in that apartment was completely up to the apartment complex. I had no control over it. I wasn't going to spend the next week moving everything out of there into storage for her, but I did save the things of hers that were irreplaceable. I left the apartment, and I just took some of her irreplaceable sentimental items, paid for them to be left in storage, for her to retrieve later when she has a place to keep them, and turned in my keys to the apartment complex, which ended my tenancy right there on the spot. I was informed what was left in the apartment would be trashed once again, and the manager let me know that the bill for cleaning would be added on to the bill for what I owe in back rent. And hey, as long as I pay what I owe on time, there won't be an eviction against my record, and I'll be able to rent again in the future with no issues. She also told me that as soon as I hand over the keys, they would be changing the locks in the apartment. So obviously that wasn't me, contrary to what Lani claims in her twitlonger. Who the fuck buys a new lock and has it installed on an apartment that they're about to turn in the keys for and move out of? From this point, I did my best to get back to normal life. I went back to streaming and having fun with my friends. I started saving up money to pay off my apartment complex and to move to Seattle late this year. And a couple days later, I was alerted that Lani had gotten out of jail, most likely after pleading down to 2 misdemeanors for possession of meth and paraphernalia. Probably in exchange for dropping that felony. And of course, she wanted to talk to me. If she really needed to, she could call my mom or message my mom and the message would get to me eventually. But frankly, I didn't want to hear from her. She knew I had no intention of ever speaking to her again, and frankly, she should have assumed all of her possessions were in the county dump, since she should have no reason to assume I would have gone out of my way to save any of her personal items from the apartment complex trashing it. She knew this was coming for months, by the way. She also knew that the deadline was going to hit while she was in jail, so I don't know why she came out of jail with the surprise Pikachu's face, with no clue where all her stuff is, or what happened to the apartment. Now, of course, I do have her cat. You guys have seen her on stream, and I'm taking very good good care of her. She loves it here. But as you guys might know, I'm not really a cat person. I'm much more of a dog person, and she just isn't my cat. As you can imagine, I've always had every intention of giving the cat back to Lani. I only took it with me to save it. Believe me, I am not going to risk legal trouble in order to keep a cat. I'm certainly not risking it either in order to hold on to a bunch of dusty old photo albums in an urn. And as she said in her twitlonger, she only has a 2-door Ford, which is apparently an impound last I heard, so I don't know where she'd put all of her stuff. I have no intent to keep on paying to keep her items in storage. It's burning a hole in my pocket for me to even hold on to these things. I only saved them out of the kindness of my heart to try and be a good person, and it's only gotten me tangled up in more drama. I'd literally have less bullshit to deal with had I let her sentimental, irreplaceable items get trashed in the unit along with the rest of her stuff. After several days of me and the people close to me not responding to her, she began threatening to take this to Twitter, clearly with the intent of embarrassing me. And of course, she'd do this a day later in the form of a twitlonger, which I know all of you have already read. I feel in this story I've done a pretty good job of giving my side of the story and shedding light on the parts of her story that are lies or completely dishonest. But I'm proud to say that a lot of you guys were already skeptical of her story as soon as she dropped the twitlonger. Now, of course, my actions speak louder than my words. It's pretty clear I've wanted this breakup to be private from the beginning. She was the one who made all of this public and decided to turn this into a massive public drama. When she dropped her twitlonger filled with lies and defamatory claims clearly meant to harm my reputation, I completely saw it fit to drop that arrest report to debunk some of her lies while I make this video. And I really do appreciate all of you who've waited so patiently for my full explanation of my side of the story. A lot of people have accused me of being the one who made this public or turning this into drama. And I mean, obviously, this is a complete lie. She's the one who dropped the twitlonger. She's the one who made this public. I always wanted to keep this completely secret because I think the more of your private life you show to the internet, the more you open yourself up to criticism and to people shitting on you. A bunch of other people have also claimed that what I did was doxing. It absolutely wasn't. Her name and her birthday, except for her birth year, were all public. She even lied to me about her birth year. Those were all made public by her. She sold clothes and stuff online sometimes, so she had a Depop store where her name and everything was public. The addresses on those arrest reports are the address of where she was arrested, far, far, far away from where she or I live, so it's not like I'm doxing her in that respect. If you think this was doxing, me posting an arrest report in response to false allegations, then please leave my community. Of course, Lani does have a very interesting way of twisting true events to fit her purposes. For example, in her twitlonger, she frames me calling her out in text for stealing my money and holding on to my debit card, forcing me to cancel it and order a new one, and thus forcing me to have to pay my mom through PayPal to pick up vapes for me because now I can't do it myself. And you know me, I gotta get that puff puff. She framed that as me whining to her. Yes, she framed me getting mad at her for stealing from me as me whining to her in her twitlonger. This was very clearly an attempt to embarrass me. So hopefully that sheds some light on her motivations and all this. Thank you to everybody who stuck around this far. I know this video isn't going to convince everybody who's already made up their mind before it even dropped, but I want all of you to know that every single person who's defending Lani in this situation after this video drops would not be defending it if it was some 31-year-old guy who seeked out a 22-year-old woman online, stole shit tons of money from her, hid a drug addiction from her, as well as a gambling addiction, and then did all the other shit Lani did. Trust me, they wouldn't be defending it. I know it's a little bit incelly to say, but there will be a little bit of gendered bias against me in this, no doubt. Though in later news, I'd like to talk about some plans I have for the future of the channel. Currently, I'm staying in the guest room of my mom's condo, still in Palm Springs, not back in Florida, and I'm saving up to get a place in Seattle, where I'm hoping to start raising Caturnix quail in my backyard. That's right, I'm hoping to rent a house with a fenced-in backyard that at least has enough room to raise quail. And the goal is to incorporate the daily minutia of having livestock into part of my content. Think about it kind of like Beau the Fifth Column's videos, only really going all the way balls deep into political commentary while doing like southern farmer stuff. It's really hard to put into words. You'll have to see it to understand it, but if it interests you, then definitely stick around. And of course, in the coming coming months, I plan to save up a large amount of money while I don't have as many bills to pay. Remember, I'm still paying my mom, I'm no freeloader. And I'm hoping to be able to move out to Seattle by the end of the year. Maybe at the latest, early next year. I can't make full promises on these time frames. Plans always do change, and me making them public opens me up to criticism and scrutiny if I'm not able to follow through. But unless anything happens, that is the current plan. I'm also thinking that if you guys really incorporate the quail being introduced to the content, I might also get some ducks as well and dig out a pond in the backyard. Who knows what other things I could add that could be really fun to, sort of incorporate into the channel. Everybody loves animals after all. It's probably mostly going to be birds though, because they're easier to take care of. When they get hurt, they're easier to mend and a lot cheaper. Their food's not expensive, and they usually don't need as much space, or you can literally just let them out to fly and they'll come home, so just usually a lot easier to take care of. Obviously, a lot of these ideas came about after I broke up with Lani because I felt this sort of shackle removed from me, like I can do anything I want. A lot of my passions that I previously had, ideas that I've previously thought far too out there that I would have never pursued, I now have the passion to do so, and I think that you guys are really going to like my channel now that I don't have this weight tied around my neck. Oh god, did this all feel so good to get off my chest. Holy shit. You guys have no idea how long I have been having to keep all this shit to myself. Not even a peep about it on stream. Only able to tell my friends and people I told Bosch, I told some other people in private, but I really kept the amount of people that I told about this pretty damn limited because I knew that if this leaked, I was going to end up getting a whole lot of shit for it if rumors and whatnot were allowed to spread unabated and I couldn't get the full story and evidence out fast enough. The online game of telephone is real, and you don't really know how bad it is until your personal life gets put through it. Anyway, if you want to help me boost this video so Lani's lies don't continue to spread unabated, because just like the sex cult drama back in the day, there are YouTubers like Jack Saint and Sophie from Mars who are boosting these allegations with absolutely no regard for evidence or hearing my side of the story. And unlike with the sex cult drama, I don't intend to let people get away with spreading these lies about me like I did in the past. I'm obviously going to be making a separate video in which I call out everyone who supported these allegations pushed by my abusive ex-partner. Yeah, we're going to have a grand old time calling them out. Jack Saint's just one of them, but that's going to be fun. So if you want to help prevent these lies from spreading unabated, please consider liking the video, subscribe, ring the bell icon, follow my social media, especially my Twitter. That's where the war is really being raged right now. And as always, have a good one.